In one locked trauma bay, medicine met something it could not control: loyalty. A dead Navy SEAL, a war-trained Belgian Malinois guarding the body, and a hospital seconds away from ordering a kill shot. Then a rookie nurse stepped forward with nothing but a hidden past, and one command that changed everything. This is not just a rescue story. It is a collision of grief, instinct, and impossible hope.
In the trauma center, a code black was declared, not for the patient, but for the guardian who refused to leave his side. For 6 hours, a state-of-the-art trauma room was shut down by a grieving war dog named Baron. He protected his Navy SEAL handler's body, promising to attack anyone who dared to come close. Snipers took their positions with the order to shoot, already approved. But then a 23-year-old nurse, shaky and overlooked, did something no one expected. She entered the dangerous room and revealed her arm. Her only tool was not a weapon, but a tattoo. The result left everyone speechless. The event would change the hospital permanently. This is a true story of a connection that even death could not sever. The alert came to Centara Norfolk General Hospital at 200 hours on a Tuesday. It shattered the quiet of the night shift. A medical helicopter was 5 minutes away with one critical patient and one who was deceased. The dispatcher added that a K9 unit was on board and the animal was very distressed. Dr. Alistair Sterling, the lead surgeon, woke himself up and put on his gloves. He saw the world in measurements of blood and time. He hated surprises, especially dogs in his trauma center. Distressed? Sterling snapped at Brenda, the head nurse, who watched the screens intently. "Why is a dog on that helicopter? If the handler is gone, put it in a crate," Brenda answered with a tense voice. "They were unable to, Doctor." The pilot reported the dog broke free when his handler passed away. "The dog is free in the cabin," she added. Sterling muttered a curse. "Fine. Get security to the landing pad with a taser. Get the body to Bay 1 and the dog out in 60 seconds. But the night would not follow Dr. Sterling's plans. As the helicopter landed, its blades turned the rain into a storm. Medics ran to the helicopter, shielding their heads from the wind. The door opened to show the aftermath of a failed mission from overseas. On the gurney was Master Chief Dalton Ghost Rivers. He was a famed member of the Special Forces. His official record was so censored it resembled a barcode. At that moment, he was simply a body under a blanket, his fight now finished. And positioned right on his chest was Baron. Baron was 80 pounds of pure power. He was a Belgian Malinois whose fur was deep brown, with a dark face that revealed only his eyes. Those eyes were filled with fire. A large paramedic named Rick tried to take the stretcher. Baron made no sudden moves. He just produced a deep growl that shook the helicopter's floor. He showed his titanium-capped teeth, which were tools made for combat. "Hey, stay back!" Rick shouted as he retreated. The flight medic yelled above the engine noise, "We cannot get him out. The dog will not let us near the chief. He believes we are a threat." Security guards in yellow raincoats appeared with poles and tasers. "Stop," the medic cautioned, motioning with his hands. "That is a top-tier military dog. If he sees a weapon, he will attack. Move away." For a painful 10 minutes, a tense situation unfolded in the rain as the helicopter waited. Then the engine's vibration slightly moved the gurney. Baron let out a sad, high-pitched whine that cut through the noise. He gently licked Dalton Rivers's cold face, pushing his nose against him, hoping for a response. The medics saw their chance and grabbed the stretcher. "Let's go now. Avoid looking at him." They ran with the gurney toward the emergency room doors. Baron did not try to stop them. He stayed firmly on the gurney, guarding his master's body as it was rushed into the bright lights of Trauma Bay 1. The doors closed, silencing the storm outside. The emergency room became quiet. In the middle of the room, among expensive medical gear, the gurney came to a stop. Baron stood up and shook the rainwater from his fur, which sprayed onto clean tools. He placed his paws on the gurney's corners, forming a protective barrier around Dalton Rivers. He faced the medical staff, bowed his head, and growled like scraping steel. No one dared to move. Hiding in a corner against a supply cabinet was the new nurse, Cassidy June. She was 24, with untidy blonde hair under her cap and perpetually frightened eyes. She had only been working there for 3 weeks. She was the person they asked to fetch coffee, and the one Dr. Sterling scolded for being too slow. Cassidy watched the dog. She noticed his tense muscles and wide pupils, but she also saw another detail. His front leg was shaking. "He is scared," she quietly said. "Be quiet, June," Sterling ordered, without looking at her. "Security, remove that animal. I have to pronounce the time of death, and I cannot with that beast here." 3 guards advanced with their batons up. Baron reacted with a sound like a firecracker. He snapped at the air, his teeth barely missing a guard's face before he returned to his spot. "All right, enough," Sterling yelled, moving back. "Everyone out. Contact the police, K9 unit and animal control. Bring me a tranquilizer gun immediately. If he moves again, shoot him." The staff left quickly. The glass doors to Trauma Bay 1 closed, trapping the dog and his handler inside as time ran out. By 400 hours, the problem had grown from a hospital issue to a matter of national security. The waiting area was full of police, held back by 2 men in suits from a government vehicle. They were from the Department of Defense and refused to speak with reporters. The tension inside the viewing area for Trauma Bay 1 was immense. Sterling walked nervously, looking at his watch every 30 seconds. "This is absurd," he said angrily, pointing at the room. "A dead soldier is in my emergency room, and we are trapped because of a house pet." One of the agents, named Miller, corrected him. "Doctor, he is not a pet. He is a specialized military canine, worth around $50,000 for his training. Technically, his rank is above yours." Sterling became visibly furious. "He is a danger to my staff and is stopping us from doing our jobs. I am giving the police permission to handle this." In the room below, Baron remained still. The dog was now sitting, his large paws resting on Dalton's chest. He began to tremble as the initial shock faded, replaced by sadness. When anyone passed the glass, Baron's ears would turn, and a deep growl could be heard through the wall. Cassidy June was cleaning the nearby hallway, hoping not to be noticed. She could not take her eyes off the scene inside. She saw the dog breathing heavily, his saliva falling near the blood on the uniform. She felt a deep sense of sorrow. She recognized that posture, the way the dog held its head. Brenda, the charge nurse, got her attention by snapping her fingers. "Hey, you! Quit watching and go get saline for Bay 4. Cassidy spoke quietly. "He is watching his 6. Brenda stopped. "His what?" Cassidy said again, holding the mop tightly. "His 6 o'clock. His back. He believes his partner is only hurt. He is protecting him. He needs a command from his handler to stand down." Brenda gave Cassidy a look of both pity and confusion. "Listen, dear, that man is not going to wake up, and the police plan to put that dog down in about 20 minutes. She was right. The local police SWAT commander, Captain Holloway, had just shown up. He was talking with Dr. Sterling. Miller was telling Holloway, "A tranquilizer is too risky. His heart rate is too high, and the stress could be fatal. If you miss, he will break through that glass before the medicine works. He is extremely dangerous," Holloway replied practically. "Then we will have to shoot him." "A single, clean shot," Holloway said. "That way we protect the body," Miller protested weakly. "He is a highly decorated animal," Sterling cut in. "He is a risk to everyone here. This is not a dog kennel. Proceed." The choice was final. Holloway gave the signal to a sniper who prepared his rifle in the hall. Cassidy's heart sank. She let go of her mop, and it crashed loudly on the floor, making everyone look at her. "Stop," she said. Her voice was unsteady but clear. Dr. Sterling stared at her. "Nurse June, Do your job or leave. You cannot shoot that dog, she insisted, walking towards them with shaking hands. He is simply following his orders. He's waiting for a release code we don't have, young lady, Agent Miller said, his voice filled with fatigue. His handler is gone. The unit is classified. We cannot get another trainer here for at least 4 hours. We are out of time. I can handle him, Cassidy said. The entire room fell silent. Doctor, Sterling let out a harsh, dry laugh. You fainted just last week, when we had to set a broken leg. You think you can walk in there with a war machine? I know, Baron, Cassidy said, her voice finding a strange, new strength. I am familiar with the protocol. You are a rookie nurse from Ohio, Brenda mocked. Please, Cassidy pleaded, looking at Agent Miller, just give me 5 minutes. If I am not able to calm him down, you can do whatever you need to do. But please do not kill a hero because he loved his partner too much. Miller glanced from the sniper to the terrified young woman. He looked down at his watch. You have 3 minutes. And nurse, if he attacks you, we will shoot right through you. Do you understand? Cassidy simply nodded. She took a very deep breath. She pressed the button that opened the glass doors. The pneumatic doors hissed open like a release of steam. Inside the bay, the air was thick with the smell of copper, wet dog, and ozone. Baron was on his feet in an instant. This time he did not bark. He became deathly quiet, his ears flat against his head, his tail completely stiff. He lowered his body, tensing up like a coiled spring. Cassidy took a step inside. The doors slid closed behind her, trapping her in the room. Outside, the emergency room staff, police, and federal agents all pressed their faces to the glass. Doctor, Sterling just shook his head. She is trying to get herself killed. Prepare a trauma team for major cuts and arterial bleeding. Cassidy stopped about 10 feet from the gurney. She avoided looking Baron in the eyes, which would be a challenge. She did not look at the body. Instead, she stared at the dog's paws. Hey, buddy, she whispered. Baron responded with a roar, a sound loud enough to make a person's heart stop. He snapped his powerful jaws, the noise echoing around the room. He moved forward, stepping off the gurney to place himself between Cassidy and Dalton. Up close, he was enormous. A long scar ran down his muzzle, a white line against his black fur. Cassidy stood perfectly still. She did not even flinch. She turned her body to the side, making herself a smaller, less threatening target. Fuss, she commanded softly. It was the German word for heel. Baron's ears twitched. He recognized the command, but he was not going to obey. He took another step forward, the hair on his back raised so high he looked like a hyena. He was only 5 feet away. One single lunge. He is going to tear her apart, Holloway said from outside, raising his hand to signal the sniper. Cassidy could see the dog's muscles preparing to launch. She knew she only had seconds. Words were not going to work. This dog was in the red zone, a place where training is forgotten and instinct and grief take over completely. He needed something to see. He needed to see a sign of authority. Very slowly Cassidy raised her left arm. She was wearing the standard navy blue nurse uniform. With her right hand she reached for the sleeve on her left shoulder. Baron growled at the movement. He showed his teeth, ready to attack the moving arm. Cassidy grabbed the fabric and began to roll it up. She rolled it up past her elbow, revealing faint, old scratch marks all the way up to her shoulder. There, tattooed onto the pale skin of her arm, was a symbol. It was not a butterfly or a flower. It was a dark, complex geometric symbol. A stylized spear broken in two, with a lightning bolt wrapped around it, and a paw print right in the center. Below the symbol were the letters Canine D.H. Unit 4. Baron stopped moving. The dog tilted his head. The growl in his throat disappeared, and he took a sharp breath. His eyes, which had been wide with rage, now focused on the tattoo. It was the official symbol of the Dark Horse K9 unit, a secret Black Ops program that was not supposed to exist. Cassidy continued. She tapped the tattoo twice with 2 fingers. Then she kneeled down on the blood-stained floor, making herself level with the dog, a sign of total trust. "Baron," she said, her voice breaking with an emotion none of the hospital staff had ever heard. "Baron, stand down. Your watch is over." The dog began to shake. He looked at the dead man, then at the girl, and then back at the tattoo. He took 1 slow step towards her. He sniffed the air. He could smell the hospital disinfectant, but he also smelled something else on her. He smelled gun oil. He smelled the scent of old pine trees. He smelled a memory. Baron let out a soft whimper that broke the hearts of everyone watching. He walked right up to Cassidy. He did not bite her. He pushed his huge head against her chest, which knocked the breath out of her. Cassidy wrapped her arms around the big dog's neck and buried her face in his wet fur. She started to cry. "I know," she whispered into his ear. "I know, my friend. I miss him, too." Outside the glass, Agent Miller took off his sunglasses. "My goodness," he said quietly. "That is no ordinary nurse. Doctor." Sterling just stared, his mouth hanging open. "Who is she?" Miller turned to the doctor. "If she has that tattoo, she is the one who trained him." The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was now heavier than the lead aprons on the radiology rack. The only sounds were the dog's heavy breathing and the soft, pained sobs of the nurse on the floor. Agent Miller signaled for the sniper to stand down. He put his own weapon away and tapped on the glass, motioning for Doctor Sterling to open the door. "She is safe," Miller said, his voice serious. "Open it very slowly." As the glass doors slid apart, the smell filled the hallway. It was the scent of a wet animal mixed with the metallic smell of battle that still clung to the body. "Nurse June? Doctor?" Sterling asked, his normally commanding voice much quieter. He entered the room with caution, never taking his eyes off the dog. Cassidy did not look up at him. She was very busy. She was checking Baron's paws and running her hands over his body to check for injuries, all while speaking in a low, fast language that was a mix of German and Dutch, rustic lichen. "Good boy, be quiet. Let me look." Baron, the deadly animal that had kept a SWAT team away for hours, was now leaning all his weight against her leg. His eyes were half closed, finally giving up his long and lonely watch. "Cassidy." Agent Miller walked into the room. He did not look at the dog, but at the tattoo on her arm. "I have not seen a Dark Horse brand in 3 years. That program was supposed to be gone for good." Cassidy slowly got to her feet. She used the back of her hand to wipe her eyes, leaving a smear of dog saliva on her face. In that instant she looked much older. The soft, new nurse look had vanished, showing a tough jawline nobody had ever seen. "They did not shut down the program, Agent," she rasped. "They just buried it. There is a huge difference." Miller's eyes went wide with understanding. "You are Cassidy June," he said. "C.J., the famous dog handler from Kandahar. You were in charge of the top-level canine project, Doctor." Sterling blinked, completely shocked. He thought to himself, "My nurse, who can barely use the pharmacy computer." Cassidy looked at the surgeon. "I know how to log in, Doctor. I just act like I do not, so I can stay in the background. I came here to disappear." She looked down at the body on the stretcher. Her hand trembled as she reached out and touched the cold, wet boot of Master Chief Dalton Rivers. "I failed him," she whispered. The flashback. 3 years ago, Cassidy June was not cleaning bedpans in Norfolk. She was standing in the dust of a military base in Jalalabad, wearing tactical pants and a shirt stained with sweat and dog treats. She was not a soldier. She was something more specialized. She was a behaviourist, a genius who could look at a Belgian Malinois puppy and know in 5 minutes if it had the courage to jump from a plane at 20,000 feet. That is where she first met Dalton Rivers. He came to the kennels because he needed a new partner. His last dog, a shepherd named Rex, had been killed by a roadside bomb. Dalton was angry and distant, and he did not trust the 21-year-old girl in charge of the program. "I need a weapon, not a pet," Dalton had said with a sneer, looking at the crying dogs. "Give me the toughest one you have got." "You do not need tough," Cassidy had replied, not at all scared by the Master Chief. "Tough gets you killed. Tough is just fear. What you need is clarity. You need a switch." She walked him to the last crate, which was labelled Project Baron. Baron was a problem. He was too intelligent, too aggressive, and had already been rejected by 3 handlers because he knew their commands before they gave them. If they paused for even a second, he would take control. In a battle, that was a very dangerous trait. "He does not respect anyone," Cassidy explained as she opened the crate. Baron came out, ignored Dalton, and sat next to Cassidy, staring at a ball in her pocket. "He needs a partner who can think faster than he can." Dalton then knelt down. For the first time his expression softened. He did not try to pet the dog, he just waited. Baron walked over, sniffed Dalton's neck, and then did something that surprised even Cassidy. He placed his paw right on Dalton's knee. "He has chosen you," Cassidy said. For the next 6 months, Cassidy was the bridge between the man and the dog. She taught them to breathe at the same time. She taught Dalton how to understand the slightest twitch of Baron's ear. She taught Baron that Dalton's heartbeat was the only rhythm that mattered on a mission, and somewhere in all that dust and heat the lines between them began to blur. Cassidy and Dalton became very close. It was not a romance with flowers, but one built on survival, long nights, cleaning equipment, and quiet talks under the endless Afghan stars about going home and about the silence that they both secretly feared. Dalton once told her while scratching Baron's ears, "When I get out, I am taking him, and then I am coming to find you. We will open a kennel. No more fighting." "Promise?" she had asked. He grinned and said, "Seal's honor." Then came the mission in the Pesh Valley. Cassidy was not cleared to participate, but she monitored the radio communications. She heard the sudden attack. She heard the massive blast. And then she heard only silence. The official report said Dalton was evacuated with life-threatening injuries, but he had survived. Baron was lost in the chaos, believed to be killed in action. That news broke Cassidy. She left the world of private contracting. The memories were too much to bear. She relocated to Norfolk, which was Dalton's home base, always hoping she might see him. But that day never came. She heard whispers that he had immediately returned to duty. She figured he had either moved on or held her responsible for losing his dog. She became a nurse, wanting to learn how to heal people instead of contributing to violence. Back in the emergency room, Cassidy returned to the present moment. "He found him," she said to everyone there, stroking Baron's head. Dalton went back for him. He did not just redeploy, he went back to find Baron. That is why he was over there. She looked directly at Agent Miller, silently asking for confirmation. Miller gave a slow nod. It was a classified mission, and technically it was unauthorized. Master Chief Rivers had heard talk of a wild Belgian Malinois leading a pack of feral dogs in the Peck district, causing trouble for the Taliban. He took a personal leave of absence. He went to retrieve his partner. "And he got him," Cassidy said, as tears finally streamed down her face. "He brought him home, but he died trying." Dr. Sterling cleared his throat loudly. The emotion in the room was almost too much to handle, but he had a procedure to follow. "Nurse June." "Cassidy," Sterling corrected himself, "I am very sorry for your loss. I truly am." But we have a legal responsibility here. The coroner is on the way. We must process the body. Can you please remove the dog from the room?" Cassidy nodded silently. She took a deep, steadying breath and looked down at Baron. "Baron," she said with a firm voice. "Vry, free." It was his release command, the words that signalled his work was finished. It meant he could just be a dog. Yet Baron remained still. He stood up from his lying position, but did not walk away. Instead, he turned, placed his front paws back onto the gurney, and rested them on Dalton's chest. He looked at Cassidy and let out a single, sharp, and insistent bark. "Woof!" Cassidy was stunned. "I gave him the command," she whispered. "He never disobeys." "Perhaps he is just in shock," Brenda offered from the doorway. Baron barked a second time, much louder now. He stared at Cassidy, then glanced at Dalton's face, and then looked back at Cassidy. He pushed Dalton's chest firmly with his nose. "Woof! Woof!" A cold chill ran down Cassidy's spine. She was familiar with every sound this dog could make. She knew his bark for a threat, his bark for playtime, and his bark for an alert. This was his alert bark. It was the one he used when he located a survivor in the wreckage. "Doctor," Cassidy said, her voice shaking with emotion, "get the crash cart." "What?" Sterling asked, clearly irritated. "He is dead, nurse. He has been for 6 hours." The flight medic pronounced him. "Rigor mortis is probably beginning." "Bring the cart," Cassidy yelled, her eyes burning with an intensity that made the security guards take a step back. "The dog is alerting." "He is signaling a live find." "That is completely impossible," Sterling scoffed. "His skin is blue. His body is cold." "Baron does not lie," Cassidy insisted. She grabbed a stethoscope from its wall hook. She did not bother asking for permission. She pushed past the dog, who moved aside for her but blocked the path for anyone else, and she put the earpieces in. She tore the thermal blanket away. She pressed the bell of the stethoscope against the still, scarred chest of Dalton Rivers. Everyone in the room held their breath. There was only silence. Cassidy closed her eyes, pushing the bell down harder, trying to hear past the hum of the hospital's air system. Thump! The sound was so faint it could have been a water droplet in another room. She kept listening. 5 seconds passed, then 10 seconds. Thump! Cassidy's eyes flew open. She looked at Dr. Sterling, her face as white as a ghost. "He is not dead," she whispered. "He is in the Lazarus state. He has an extremely slow heart rate. It is probably hypothermia that was hidden by some kind of paralytic drug." Sterling quickly moved forward. "Do not be absurd." He grabbed the stethoscope from her and listened for himself. In a single moment all of his arrogance disappeared. "Code Blue!" Sterling shouted, spinning to face the staff. "I have a rhythm. It is weak, but it is there. Get me epinephrine. Get me warm fluids. Warm up everything. We have to intubate. Move! Move now!" The trauma bay erupted into organized chaos. This was not the calm, methodical process of a typical Code Blue. This was like performing surgery in a combat zone. "I need access to the femoral artery," Sterling yelled. "Nurse, cut his pants off. Get a warming blanket on him. We cannot get near him. Rick!" the paramedic shouted. He attempted to approach with the defibrillator pads, but Baron growled and snapped at his hand. The dog was now confused. The sudden shouting and people rushing toward his handler felt like a new attack. He lunged forward, his teeth catching the sleeve of a resident doctor. "Get that dog out of here!" Sterling screamed. "I cannot work with a wolf in the room! No!" Cassidy shouted back. She was doing 2 things at once, preparing an IV bag with one hand while holding Baron's collar with the other. If you remove him, he will tear the door off its hinges. He knows Dalton is alive. "Then you need to control him, June, or I swear I will sedate him myself." Cassidy immediately dropped to her knees beside the gurney, right in the center of all the medical activity. She cupped Baron's muzzle in both of her hands, making the dog look directly at her. Baron, Platz, Blair. The dog trembled with nervous energy, his eyes glancing at the doctors who were putting tubes down Dalton's throat. "Look at me," Cassidy commanded, her face just inches from the dog's powerful jaws. "They are helping. Helping." She took Baron's front paw and placed it on her own scrubs, right over her heart. Then she moved his paw to Dalton's arm. "Friend," she said quietly. "Pack." Baron let out a soft whine that was full of distress, but he sat down. He sat by the wheels of the gurney, tucking himself under the metal frame. He became perfectly still, like a statue, with his eyes locked on the heart monitor that was showing a flat line. "Okay, he is clear," Cassidy yelled. "Go!" For the next hour, Cassidy June was more than just a nurse. She became a connection. She kept one hand buried deep in the fur of the dog under the gurney, and used her other hand to pass instruments to Dr. Sterling. "Core temperature is 82 degrees, Brenda announced. "He is frozen solid." "Pushing epinephrine," the resident said. Still no response from the pacemaker. "Come on, Dalton," Cassidy whispered, looking at the grey, lifeless face of the man she had loved from afar in the desert. "You did not come all the way back from the dead just to die here in Norfolk. Fight." Beneath the gurney, Baron started to howl. It was not a loud howl. It was a deep, melodic, and continuous sound. He was singing to the Master Chief. "What is that noise?" Sterling snapped, with sweat beading on his forehead. "He is calling him back," Cassidy replied. "Keep working." All of a sudden, the monitor made a sound. A shaky, uneven green line appeared on the screen. "Beep, beep, we have a rhythm," Brenda shouted with joy. "Sinus bradycardia." "He is speeding up. His pressure is coming up," the anesthesiologist called out. 80 over 40, 90 over 50. Dalton's chest rose and fell in a great heave. A puff of air flowed into the ventilator tube, misting up the plastic. "He is back," Sterling said, dropping his hands to his sides and letting out a breath he felt like he had been holding for an hour. "My God, he is back." The room filled with sounds of relief and tears. The nurses started hugging each other. Even Agent Miller, who had been standing quietly in the corner, wiped a tear from his eye. But Cassidy did not celebrate. She slid down the side of a medical cabinet until she was sitting on the floor, completely drained. Baron crawled out from underneath the gurney. He did not go to Dalton this time. He went straight to Cassidy. He began licking the tears from her cheeks, his tail wagging slowly, thumping a soft rhythm against the cabinets. Here is the twist. 2 days later, Dalton Rivers was in stable condition. He was recovering in the intensive care unit, warm, stitched up, and slowly waking up. The story had become a global sensation. The dog who guarded a ghost. The nurse who understood the dog. Cassidy was sitting at his bedside reading a magazine, while Baron was asleep on her feet. The hospital administration had made a special exception for the dog. He was now on the official roster as a therapy assistant. Dalton let out a groan. His eyelids fluttered open. He looked around the sterile room, blinking in the bright light. His gaze first landed on the dog. Then it found the woman. "Cass," he said, his voice raspy and dry. "Hey, soldier," she smiled, setting her magazine aside. "You certainly took your time waking up." "I had to go get him," Dalton whispered. "I made a promise." "I know," she said, reaching over to take his hand. Dalton squeezed her fingers weakly. He looked at Baron, then back at her. His face suddenly became serious and urgent. "Cassidy," he said, and his heart rate monitor started beeping faster. "The dog, Baron, he was not guarding me." Cassidy looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "Of course he was. He stayed by your side for 6 hours." "No," Dalton said, trying to sit up but wincing in pain. "You have to listen to me." "On the helicopter. right before I passed out. I put it inside his vest." "Put what in his vest?" "The intel," Dalton rasped. "The real reason they shot us down. The reason my own team abandoned me. It was not a rescue mission, Cass. It was a clean-up operation." Cassidy stood frozen. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Dalton, what are you trying to tell me?" "I am saying," Dalton whispered, glancing toward the door, "that the men who shot me were not Taliban, and I believe one of them is sitting in the lobby right now, waiting for visiting hours to start." Cassidy looked down at Barron. The dog was now wide awake. He was not looking at Dalton. His eyes were fixed on the door to the ICU room, and a low growl was rumbling deep in his chest. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping time with the rush of adrenaline flooding through Cassidy's body. Dalton's words hung in the air like a thick fog. A clean-up. Cassidy got to her feet slowly, her hands starting to shake. She noticed the heavy tactical vest that Barron still had on. Hospital workers tried to remove it, but the dog growled whenever they touched it. Now she understood the reason. He was not just protecting his owner, he was protecting the proof. "Where is it?" Cassidy whispered, getting down next to the dog. Dalton raised a shaky finger. "It is in the left shoulder panel, inside the lining. You will have to cut it." Cassidy took the trauma shears from her pocket, the same ones she used for emergencies. She moved her fingers along the inside of Barron's tough harness. She found it. A tiny, hard rectangle, smaller than a fingernail, was sewn deep inside the padding. She pushed the shears into the material and made a cut. A small memory card fell into her hand. "I have it," she thought. "Hide it," Dalton said weakly, his gaze locked on the doorknob. "And leave if Miller comes in." The handle began to move. Cassidy had no time to escape. She pushed the card into her scrub cap, hiding it in her bun. She turned around as the door opened. It was Agent Miller. He was by himself. He had taken off his suit coat and rolled up his sleeves. He seemed professional and calm, which made him absolutely terrifying. "Agent Miller," she said. "Doctor, Sterling told me our patient is awake." "That is a miracle," Miller replied, his smile cold. "He is still very weak," Cassidy stammered, moving to stand between Miller and the hospital bed. Barron got to his feet, a deep growl coming from his chest. This was not a warning growl. This was the low, dangerous sound of an animal ready to attack. "I am sure he is," Miller said, walking in and shutting the door. He locked it. The click sounded like a gunshot. "I have to get his official statement right away. The rules state I must do this by myself. You can stay in the hallway." "I cannot leave him," Cassidy said, refusing to move. "His condition is critical." "Hospital policy does not matter to me." Miller's voice became much deeper. He reached toward his pants. He was not reaching for a badge. He took out a syringe. "And I do not care about having witnesses." Dalton tried to sit up, but he was far too injured. "Miller, do not do it. The files are already sent." "A nice effort, Ghost," Miller said with a sneer, taking the cap off the needle. "We blocked all communications in the valley. Nothing was sent. You died in an accident. It is such a shame. And this dog, well, he will have to be put down for attacking a nurse. Another terrible shame." Miller moved closer with the syringe held high. It was not a painkiller. It was a clear, fluid potassium chloride, enough to make a heart stop beating. "No!" Cassidy yelled. She picked up the first thing she saw, a metal tray, and threw it at Miller. It hit his shoulder but did no damage. Miller let out a cold, sharp laugh. He lunged toward Dalton's intravenous line, trying to put the poison straight into the port. He made one big mistake. He forgot about the Belgian Malinois. "Barron, attack!" "Seize!" Dalton yelled the order with the very last bit of strength he had. Barron did not need the order. He had been waiting for 6 long hours for the chance to release the fury he was holding back. The dog leaped from the end of the bed. He was a fast-moving shape of brown and black fur. He did not aim for the arm. He aimed for the chest. 80 pounds of pure muscle struck Miller like a freight train, throwing the agent back into the medical cart. Trays of tools, medicine vials, and fluid bags fell to the ground with a loud crash of breaking glass. Miller yelled as Barron's teeth bit down on his forearm, the one holding the syringe. The sound of the bone snapping could be heard above the noise. The syringe flew away, but Miller was a trained professional. He was a rogue special agent. Using his free hand, he reached for a hidden holster on his ankle. It held a small pistol. "Cassidy! The gun!" Dalton shouted. Miller delivered a hard kick to the dog's side. Barron yelped in pain but did not release his grip. He shook his head back and forth, tearing through the suit and the skin underneath. Miller lifted the pistol, pointing it right at the dog's head. Cassidy did not hesitate. She did not stop to think. She acted. She noticed the defibrillator machine on the wall. She grabbed the 2 paddles. They were always kept ready for use. "Clear!" she screamed, a reflex from her job. She did not use them on a patient. She rushed forward and pushed the paddles onto Agent Miller's neck as he squeezed the trigger. Bang! The weapon fired, and the bullet broke the glass in the observation window. Zap! 200 joules of current went through Agent Miller. His whole body stiffened. His eyes went back into his head. He shook uncontrollably and let go of the gun. Barron immediately released him as the man fell to the ground, still twitching. The room was quiet again, except for the dog's heavy breathing and the beeping of the monitors. Security guards smashed through the broken door just a moment later with their weapons raised. "Drop it! Drop the weapon!" Cassidy just stood there, holding the defibrillator paddles like they were a gun, breathing heavily. Blood from Miller's arm was on her scrubs. Barron stood protectively over the unconscious agent. "He was trying to kill him," Cassidy gasped, gesturing toward Miller. "Look in his pocket. Check the syringe." Captain Halloway came through the guards. He saw the scene, the unconscious agent, the brave dog, and the young nurse with the paddles. He saw the bullet hole. He bent down and took the syringe that Miller had dropped. He smelled the tip. "Potassium," Halloway said quietly. He turned to Cassidy. "You saved us a great deal of trouble, nurse." Dalton fell back on his pillows, and a small smile appeared on his face. "That," he said softly, "is a very good nurse." 6 months after that day, the quiet of the Shenandoah Valley felt different from the quiet of the hospital room. It was not the tense, heavy silence you feel before a person's heart stops. It was a peaceful silence, full of the sound of wind in the trees, a far-off tractor, and the steady sound of a dog's paws on the ground. The sign that hung on the iron gate was new, but the wood was made to look old, with burnt edges for a rustic feel. Carved into the oak were these words: "Dark Horse Sanctuary, a rehabilitation centre for the broken and the brave." Cassidy June stood on the large porch of the farmhouse, cleaning her hands with a cloth. She was not in her scrubs any more. She wore comfortable denim jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up. The tattoo on her left shoulder, showing a broken spear and a lightning bolt, was not covered up. It was now a symbol of her strength, visible in the Virginia sunlight. She rested on the railing, watching what was happening in the 3-acre field below. To a stranger, it might seem like chaos at a dog park. To Cassidy, it was a perfectly balanced system of healing. There were 12 dogs in that field. None of them were ordinary. A German shepherd was there that had a titanium leg, a survivor from a raid in Mexico. There was a nervous, scarred Dutch shepherd who had left the police force because he feared loud sounds. A blind Labrador was also there, who had lost his sight finding bombs. They were the forgotten ones, the dogs that the system had used and then abandoned. But in the middle of the field, creating a sense of calm, was Barron. The Belgian Malinois was transformed. His tactical vest was gone. and he now wore a strong leather collar. His fur, which was once dirty from battle, now shined like polished metal. He walked with a noble and confident energy, moving among the other dogs. He would stop minor fights with a single glance, and lead the blind lab away from the fence. He was the pack leader. But he did not lead them with fear. He led them with his own experience. The screen door made a noise as it opened behind Cassidy. That sound was followed by the loud, off-balance step of a boot, and then the quiet tap of a cane. "You are looking at him again," a deep voice said. Cassidy smiled but did not turn. "I am just checking that he is not teaching the new dog how to take apart the tractor." Dalton Rivers came out onto the porch. He was leaner than he was in the hospital, his combat muscles replaced by a tough, slender build. He walked with a clear limp, a permanent mark from the crash and the cold that almost cost him his leg. But he was standing. He carried 2 hot cups of coffee. He gave one to Cassidy and rested against the railing, easing the pressure on his injured leg. "He misses it, you know," Dalton said softly, as he watched Barron look up at a hawk in the sky. "The job, the excitement. You can remove the dog from the war, but I am not sure you can remove the war from the dog." "He is not in a war any more, Dalton," Cassidy said quietly, blowing on her coffee. "He is just on watch. It is not the same. He knows this is his new territory to protect." Dalton drank some coffee, its familiar warmth calming him. "I understand that feeling." The last 6 months had been a crazy time that neither of them had seen coming. The event at the Norfolk hospital set off a chain reaction that went all the way to the top of the Pentagon. The memory card that Dalton had put in Barron's vest had more than just mission information. It contained evidence of an illegal weapons trade run by a secret group inside the Defense Department, a group led by Agent Miller. The results of that discovery were massive. After the whirlwind of hearings, court dates, and a media storm that put Dalton and Cassidy on every screen, they vanished. The world knew her as the angel with the ink, and him as the ghost who came back. But they wanted none of that fame. The day Dalton received his honourable discharge and a Purple Heart, he tossed the medal in a drawer. They took his pension, added Cassidy's savings, and bought this quiet farm. They had disappeared once more, but this time it was their own choice. "Today is Miller's sentencing," Dalton said, his voice cutting through the peaceful morning air. He stared out at the line of trees, not at Cassidy. A small shiver went through her. I kept the television off. "Life with no chance of parole," Dalton stated. "He's going to Leavenworth." They almost gave him a lethal dose, but he made a deal to rat out his entire network. "Good," Cassidy replied, her tone as hard as steel. She glanced at the faint scar on her arm, a ghostly reminder of where Miller had grabbed her that night. "Let him rot." "He will," Dalton agreed, clearing his throat and adjusting his grip on his cane. The Pentagon called again this morning. Cassidy finally turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised in question. "Let me guess," she said. "They either want Barron for a photo opportunity, or they want you to consult on their new training methods." "Both," Dalton said with a dry, humorless laugh. "And they want to give Barron the PDSA Dickin Medal. It is the animal version of the Medal of Honor. They want a big ceremony in Washington, D.C. The whole 9 yards. What did you say to them?" Dalton looked down toward the dogs. Barron was no longer running. He stood perfectly still, with his nose pointed to the sky, reading the breeze that swept down from the mountains. He looked magnificent, a living statue of instinct and devotion. "I told them no," Dalton said quietly. A real, warm smile spread across Cassidy's face, making small wrinkles appear at the corners of her eyes. "Why? Because he does not need a medal," Dalton answered, his voice thick with feeling. "A medal is only a piece of metal. It is for the humans. It helps them feel better about sending dogs into danger. Barron does not care about shiny things. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty. Dalton turned toward Cassidy. He reached for her hand, his rough fingers lacing through hers. "Besides," Dalton whispered, "he already received his greatest reward. He got us. He came home." Cassidy gently squeezed his hand. "We all came home." At that moment, a loud bang from the road shattered the peace as a truck backfired. Instantly, everything changed. The dogs in the field scattered, barking in alarm. The blind Labrador retriever just spun in anxious circles, whining. But Barron did not run. He immediately dropped into a defensive stance. The fur on his back stood up, and his teeth were bared. He placed himself squarely between the farm gate and the other dogs. Then he let out the same deep, terrifying growl that had stopped an entire SWAT team in its tracks. On the porch, Dalton flinched, his hand instinctively flying to his hip for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart pound against her ribs. Then, as quickly as it started, there was silence. The truck's engine noise faded away. Barron held his position for 10 long seconds. He carefully scanned the entire area. Then he looked to the porch, and his eyes met Dalton's. Dalton gave a single, tiny nod. "Clear," he breathed. Barron let out a deep puff of air. He rose, shook his entire body as if to physically throw off the stress, and walked over to the blind dog, giving him a comforting nudge. "You see?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. "He is still watching our backs." Dalton looked at the woman who had saved him, not with surgery, but with sheer bravery. He looked at the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously stopped a bullet. He looked at the cane that he now leaned on. "We are a messy bunch of broken toys, are we not, Cass?" he murmured. Cassidy moved closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of a heart that had once stopped completely. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We are just put back together. That is what Kintsugi is about. The gold that fills the cracks makes the pottery even stronger." Dalton gently kissed the top of her head. "You and your stories, they are true," she laughed. Barron had left the other dogs. He was walking up the path to the porch. He climbed the wooden steps, the sound of his claws making a soft clicking noise. He did not go to his water bowl. He did not go to his bed. He walked over and sat down right between them and the top of the stairs. He faced away from them, guarding them from the world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were turned backward, listening to the sound of their breathing. Dalton sat on the porch swing and pulled Cassidy down beside him. The sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery shades of purple and orange, colours that reminded them of Afghanistan, but without the fear. "Hey, Barron," Dalton said softly. The dog's ear twitched in response. "Your watch is over, my friend," Dalton said. "You can stand down." Barron lifted his head. He looked at Dalton, and then he looked at Cassidy. He let out a long, happy sigh that seemed to make the whole porch vibrate. He stayed in his spot, but his eyes slowly closed. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the soldier was asleep. The Guardian was finally at peace, watching over the only family he had ever truly wanted. Barron and Dalton showed the world that the connection between a handler and a K9 is not just about commands and equipment. It is a deep bond between souls that goes beyond rules, beyond rank, and even beyond death itself. Cassidy June did more than save a life in that hospital room. She saved a brotherhood. She taught us all that sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply loyalty. Here at Dark Horse Sanctuary, the mission goes on. They no longer fight wars, but they help heal the warriors who have been left behind. If this story touched your heart, then you have a mission of your own today. Please click that like button. Do it not for the website's algorithm, but as a way to honor the brave service dogs who stand guard in the night while the rest of us sleep safely. Please subscribe and turn on your notifications. We have more amazing true stories of survival and bravery to share with you every single week. And I really want to hear from all of you in the comments section below. Do you think that dogs have a special sixth sense? Has an animal ever stepped up to protect you when you felt unsafe? Please share your experience with our community. Until our next story, please stay safe, hold the ones you love close, and keep watching. Baron was no longer running. He stood perfectly still, with his nose pointed to the sky, reading the breeze that swept down from the mountains. He looked magnificent, a living statue of instinct and devotion. "I told them no," Dalton said quietly. A real, warm smile spread across Cassidy's face, making small wrinkles appear at the corners of her eyes. "Why? Because he does not need a medal," Dalton answered, his voice thick with feeling. "A medal is only a piece of metal. It is for the humans. It helps them feel better about sending dogs into danger. Baron does not care about shiny things. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty." Dalton turned toward Cassidy. He reached for her hand, his rough fingers lacing through hers. "Besides," Dalton whispered, "he already received his greatest reward. He got us. He came home." Cassidy gently squeezed his hand. "We all came home." At that moment, a loud bang from the road shattered the peace as a truck backfired. Instantly, everything changed. The dogs in the field scattered, barking in alarm. The blind Labrador retriever just spun in anxious circles, whining. But Baron did not run. He immediately dropped into a defensive stance. The fur on his back stood up, and his teeth were bared. He placed himself squarely between the farm gate and the other dogs. Then he let out the same deep, terrifying growl that had stopped an entire SWAT team in its tracks. On the porch, Dalton flinched, his hand instinctively flying to his hip for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart pound against her ribs. Then, as quickly as it started, there was silence. The truck's engine noise faded away. Baron held his position for 10 long seconds. He carefully scanned the entire area. Then he looked to the porch, and his eyes met Dalton's. Dalton gave a single, tiny nod. "Clear," he breathed. Baron let out a deep puff of air. He rose, shook his entire body as if to physically throw off the stress, and walked over to the blind dog, giving him a comforting nudge. "You see?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. "He is still watching our backs." Dalton looked at the woman who had saved him, not with surgery, but with sheer bravery. He looked at the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously stopped a bullet. He looked at the cane that he now leaned on. "We are a messy bunch of broken toys, are we not, Cass?" he murmured. Cassidy moved closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of a heart that had once stopped completely. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We are just put back together. That is what Kintsugi is about. The gold that fills the cracks makes the pottery even stronger." Dalton gently kissed the top of her head. "You and your stories, they are true," she laughed. Baron had left the other dogs. He was walking up the path to the porch. He climbed the wooden steps, the sound of his claws making a soft clicking noise. He did not go to his water bowl. He did not go to his bed. He walked over and sat down right between them and the top of the stairs. He faced away from them, guarding them from the world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were turned backward, listening to the sound of their breathing. Dalton sat on the porch swing and pulled Cassidy down beside him. The sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery shades of purple and orange, colours that reminded them of Afghanistan, but without the fear. "Hey, Baron," Dalton said softly. The dog's ear twitched in response. "Your watch is over, my friend," Dalton said. "You can stand down." Baron lifted his head. He looked at Dalton, and then he looked at Cassidy. He let out a long, happy sigh that seemed to make the whole porch vibrate. He stayed in his spot, but his eyes slowly closed. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the soldier was asleep. The guardian was finally at peace, watching over the only family he had ever truly wanted. Barron and Dalton showed the world that the connection between a handler and a K9 is not just about commands and equipment. It is a deep bond between souls that goes beyond rules, beyond rank, and even beyond death itself. Cassidy June did more than save a life in that hospital room. She saved a brotherhood. She taught us all that sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply loyalty. Here at Dark Horse Sanctuary, the mission goes on. They no longer fight wars, but they help heal the warriors who have been left behind. If this story touched your heart, then you have a mission of your own today. Please click that like button. Do it not for the website's algorithm, but as a way to honor the brave service dogs who stand guard in the night while the rest of us sleep safely. Please subscribe and turn on your notifications. We have more amazing true stories of survival and bravery to share with you every single week. And I really want to hear from all of you in the comments section below. Do you think that dogs have a special sixth sense? Has an animal ever stepped up to protect you when you felt unsafe? Please share your experience with our community. Until our next story, please stay safe, hold the ones you love close, and keep watching.